Verses 25 to 54. We have here the distribution of the spoil which was taken in this expedition against Midian. God himself directed how it should be distributed, and Moses and Eleazar did according to the directions, and thus unhappy contests among themselves were prevented and the victory was made to turn to the common benefit. It was fit that he who gave them the prey should order the disposal of it. All we have is from God, and therefore must be subject to his will. The prey is ordered to be divided into two parts, one for the 12,000 men that undertook the war, and the other for the congregation. The prey that was divided seems to have been only the captives and the cattle. As for the plate, and jewels, and other goods, every man kept what he took, as is intimated, v. 50-53. That only was distributed which would be of use for the stocking of that good land into which they were going. Now observe, that the 1/2 of the prey was given to the whole congregation, Moses allotting to each tribe its share, and then leaving it to the heads of the tribes to divide their respective shares among themselves, according to their families. The war was undertaken on the behalf of the whole congregation. They would all have been ready to go to the help of the Lord against the mighty, if they had been so ordered, and they did help, it is likely, by their prayers, and therefore God appoints that those that tarried at home should divide the spoil. PS 68:12. David, in his time, made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel, that, as his part is that goes down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. 1 SA 30:24, 25. Those that are employed in public trusts must not think to benefit themselves only by their toils and hazards, but must aim at the advantage of the community. That yet the 12,000 that went to the battle had as much for their share as the whole congregation, which were 50 times as many, had for theirs, so that the particular persons of the soldiery had a much better share than any of their brethren that tarried at home, and good reason they should. The greater pains we take, and the greater hazards we run, in the service of God and our generation, the greater will our recompense be at last, for God is not unrighteous to forget the work and labor of love. God was to have a tribute out of it, as an acknowledgement of his sovereignty over them in general, and that he was their king to whom tribute was due, and particularly of his interest in this war and the gains of it, he having given them their success, and that the priests, the Lord's receivers, might have something added to the provision made for their maintenance. Note, whatever we have, God must have his dues out of it. And here, as before, the soldiers are favored above the rest of the congregation, for out of the people's share God required 1 in 50, but out of the soldiers' share only 1 in 500, because the people got theirs easily, without any peril or fatigue. The less opportunity we have of honoring God with our personal services, the more it is expected we should honor him with our substance. The tribute out of the soldiers' half was given to the priests, v. 29, that out of the people's half was given to the Levites, v. 30. For the priests were taken from among the Levites, as these soldiers from among the people, for special and hazardous service, and their pay was proportioned accordingly. Here is a great example of piety and devotion in the officers of the army, the colonels, that are called captains of thousands, and the inferior officers that were captains of hundreds. They came to Moses as their general and commander-in-chief, and, though he was now going off the stage, they very humbly and respectfully addressed themselves to him, calling themselves his servants. The honors they had won did not puff them up, so as to make them forget their duty to him. Observe in their address to them the pious notice they take of God's wonderful goodness to them in this late expedition, in preserving not only their own lives, but the lives of all the men of war that they had under their charge, so that, upon the review of their muster roll, it appeared there was not one missing, v. 49. This was very extraordinary, and perhaps cannot be paralleled in any history. So many thousands of lives jeoparded in the high places of the field, and not one lost, either by the sword of the enemy or by any disease or disaster. This was the Lord's doing, and cannot but be marvelous in the eyes of those that consider how the lives of all men, especially soldiers, are continually in their hands. It is an evidence of the tender feeling which these commanders had for their soldiers, and that their lives were very precious to them, that they looked upon it as a mercy to themselves that none of those under their charge miscarried. Of all that were given them they had lost none, so precious also is the blood of Christ's subjects and soldiers to him. PS 72:14. The pious acknowledgment they make for this favor, therefore we have brought an oblation to the Lord, v. 50. The oblation they brought was out of that which every man had gotten, and it was gotten honestly by a divine warrant. Thus every man should lay by according as God has prospered him. 1 Cor 16:2. For where God sows plentifully in the gifts of his bounty, he expects to reap accordingly in the fruits of our piety and charity. The tabernacle first, and the temple afterwards, were beautified and enriched with the spoils taken from the enemies of Israel, as by David, 2 Sa 8:11, 12, and his captains, 1 Chr 26:26, 27. We should never take anything to ourselves, in war or trade, which we cannot in faith consecrate a part of to God, who hates robbery for burnt offerings, but, when God has remarkably preserved and prospered us, he expects that we should make some particular return of gratitude to him. As to this oblation, the captains offered it to make an atonement for their souls, v. 50. Instead of coming to Moses to demand a recompense for the good service they had done in avenging the Lord of Midian, or to set up trophies of their victory for the immortalizing of their own names, they bring an oblation to make atonement for their souls, being conscious to themselves, as the best men must be even in their best services, that they had been defective in their duty, not only in that instance for which they were reproved, v. 14, but in many others, for there is not a just man upon the earth that doeth good and sinneth not. Moses accepted it, and laid it up in the tabernacle as a memorial for the children of Israel, v. 54, that is, a monument of God's goodness to them, that they might be encouraged to trust in him in their further wars, and a monument of their gratitude to God. Sacrifices are said to be memorials, that he, being well pleased with this thankful acknowledgment of favors bestowed, might continue and repeat his mercies to them.